I've never thought about past lives, but your question made me remember that when I was in junior high, I came downstairs one morning and told my mom, I had the weirdest dream. I dreamed I had a baby and we kept it in a shoebox in the oven. While I thought that was just totally crazy dream stuff, she said, that's what they did with your great aunt. My great aunt, born around 1905, prematurely, this was in the rural southern U.S., and my mom explained that they had kept her in a shoebox in the gas oven, not on, warm just from the pilot light, hillbilly incubator. She died many years before I was born, in her 50s, from cancer. For the rest of my life, again and again, as my grandparents became older and I was encouraged to point out things I might like to keep or have, I'd like this was always responded with, oh, that was your great aunt's. I have a lot of things that belong to her and I treasure them. I like them much more than anything else from my family. Then, the strangest. We were back home where my mother was from. My mother was at her cousin's house, and they were being visited by some longtime acquaintance of the family I'd never met or heard of, who was well into her 80s. As I walked in the living room, there sat this perfectly sweet, nice old lady, but I had an immediate dislike for her. It felt so strange. I really didn't like her at all. I felt like she was a cat with a bird in her mouth. If you don't know the expression, it means she's got a secret, or she did something and got away with it and is proud of it. But she was perfectly lovely and sweet to me. There was nothing in her demeanor to suggest any of this. We all sat and visited and for a while, but it was an unmistakable feeling I had. Later on, when my mom casually brought her visit up, I said, I have no idea why, but I just didn't like her. My mom said, well, she's the woman who had an affair with your great-aunt's husband while she was very sick, and I think she died of a broken heart because of it. I used to joke about having been a smoker in a past life. I'd never smoked, but sometimes just felt like I really wanted a cigarette, like if I was stressed out or something. This year, I started smoking. I took to it immediately. I can't work a lighter, but can light up perfectly with matches, and for the first few weeks, with every cigarette I smoked, I had weird images pop up in my head. Auburn hair curled on my shoulders, cleaning the doorstep of a red brick house on a long terraced street down a hill, a yellow dress with a distinctive palm leaf pattern, pink paint peeling on a bathroom wall, dancing in a big hall with a parquet floor. And then I started thinking of a little boy and him dying, 3 years old, of some sort of respiratory illness, her son. Since then, I've stopped having the images. I'll prefix that I'm a white guy from London, aged 21. From a young age, as young as I can remember, I'd always looked in the mirror and thought I was pale, and from the earliest memories I have, I always had this voice in the back of my head whenever I looked in a mirror saying, I look like I fell in the samper. So from the word go, according to my parents, I had a real connection with Eastern mysticism. Coming from a Christian household and school, there was no way I could know about Buddhism, but my mom's told me from a very young age I used to talk about key tenets of Buddhism, sit quietly and meditate, even though I didn't know what the hell it was just an innate thing I used to do, and always used to demand we go in the local Asian knick-knack shop, sells fans, Buddhas, dragons, bells, that sort of thing, whenever we went to town, and where I'd have some real respect for these statues of Buddha. This baffled my parents because I knew all about Buddhist principles without ever being taught, and this was at the age of 4 or 5 plus, even though at the time I'd never heard of Buddhism. Anyway, as I grew up, I lived with this feeling that I had a very deep connection with what I learned was Buddhism. My parents have also told me that as soon as I started talking, I started to talk about memories in such vivid depth that I couldn't have been lying, but they'd actually never happened to me. It's bizarre to describe. I know full well I've never been to a monastery, but I can distinctly remember lighting incense in an ornate foreign monastery. Similarly, conducting rituals, like lighting incense and ringing bells. These were all stories I used to talk to my parents about from when I was very young. At first, my parents put it down to a vivid imagination, but I used to go on and on about in such depth that it was my mom who really clocked something was up. As I grew up, more memories came to the forefront, and I started believing I had been reincarnated from a Buddhist monk simply because there was no other explanation. I'm not schizophrenic. I don't have bipolar or anything. I'm perfectly up top, normal socially, lots of friends, do well at school, even study science at degree, but I have these memories that I have never myself experienced. Anyway, I started exploring mysticism in general much more. My history on here is a lot of tarot readings I give. But it was at university I came by chance across a Buddhist society. I decided to swing by and ended up talking to one of the people there who runs it. I explained it, and he was skeptical, but came around to it, and I asked him about the samper thing. Turns out samper is the word for rubbish or something, and in times past it was used to refer to a pit of white clay within the monasteries. This might be total bullshit, as I can't find anything online to back it up, but it makes sense as I thought my face was covered in this white clay powder, because I'm very pasty and white and not more tanned. As for my old name or where I exactly lived, I have no idea, but I firmly believe that I have lived on this planet before now. I also have no issue with death. Even when my dad died at 15, I wasn't that bothered because I just had this feeling that death isn't the end. Every now and again, I still get these memories springing up, normally completely out of the blue when something reminds you of something, except sometimes it'll remind me of something I haven't done. Samper may translate to Sampa, which starts with a T, which is Tibetan barley flour. A white man and a black man are leading me away from the beach as a small child, about 4 or 5, with promises of a juice or a puppy. I can't remember which, but based on my personality in this life, I'd be tempted by either offer. After walking for a while, I start to feel uneasy that I'm going so far away from my parents who are still on the beach. When we get to a house in a rundown area, an old black woman is sitting out front in a white plastic lawn chair. In a very serious tone, she says to the men, "What are you doing with that little girl? You know you shouldn't have no child here." One of the men says jokingly, "You know, we're just playing with her." At this point, I'm becoming truly terrified, and I'm silently praying she will rescue me. Instead, she bursts out laughing, grabs my arm as I'm led past her, and says to me, "I'm sorry, baby. I can't stop him." All of my hope dies. I knew it was a lie and that something bad was about to happen to me, and she chose not to help me. After that, everything is fuzzy. The last part I remember is blackness, nothingness. I dreamed this when I was about 8 or 9 years, and I remember thinking, what the fuck did I just dream? It was so horrible, and the details were so crisp, but I knew that the little girl was not me in this life. To this day, I have no idea if that was a terrible past life or just a really terrible nightmare. My daughter, who is now 14 years old, has an unusual fear. When she was about 3 and a half, she quite eloquently explained it to me and blew my mind. Since the time she could walk, she has had this massive fear of the television alert system, where they interrupt your show to test the emergency broadcast system with loud sets of beeps and boops. It would send her into a mind-shattering state of fear and panic, and she would be inconsolable until it was over. She never liked too much audio stimulation, so I chalked it up to that until one day when she was 3 and a half, and it happened while I was playing with her in her room. When it was over and she had calmed down, I simply asked why it was so scary. The answer gave me chills. "Because last time I heard it, Mama," she called me Mom, never Mama, "and Papa Joe," she knew nobody by the name Joe or Papa, "put me in the back of an ambulance," she pronounced it ambulance, and it was a term I'm sure she didn't even know, and I never saw them again. I didn't jump to any conclusions. I told her she had never been in an ambulance and asked who Papa Joe was. Almost frustrated with me, she answered, "Not here, before." "Before what?" I asked. "Before I was in there," she answered, pointing to my stomach. Now she had my undivided attention. I gently pressed for more info, being very careful not to lead her answers in any way. "What happened when you were in the ambulance?" "Mama and Joe were crying, and I had to say bye-bye," she answered while calmly playing with her toy cars. "Why were they sad? Why did you say bye-bye?" "The sound on the TV, then the wind whooshed," she made a wind sound, "came and things got broke. I had a real bad boo-boo, but it didn't ouchie me." "So why did you say bye-bye?" "My friends told me I had to go home." I began to think that she may have been trailing off at this point, but I was wrong. "Home? Back to Mama and Papa Joe?" Getting very frustrated with me. "No! Home!" I decided not to push that part any further. "Okay, what did you do when you got home?" "I played. Then my friends said I need a new mom." "Okay." She lifted her head, grinning ear to ear. "So I picked you." And she wrapped her arms around me and gave me a big squeeze. The whole conversation had me mentally drained, and I left it at that for the time being. I assured her that I would never make her say bye-bye, but her fear continued. As she grew, she completely forgot everything about her former life, but the fear stayed fairly strong. We lived in New York until she was 9, then I married and we moved to our current home in Wyoming. Tornadoes and massive storms are fairly common in our neck of the woods, but my husband spent the first few years of our marriage holding her in his massive arms whenever the alert sounded, whether it was a test or an actual storm. Eventually, she learned to simply mute the TV until it was over, and we both felt she was over it. About 2 months ago, the town's tornado siren alerted, and all that changed. The TVs weren't on at the time, the siren was our only warning, and our 14-year-old daughter transformed back into that panicked toddler I had so often comforted. My husband, having way more experience with Wyoming's unpredictable weather pattern than I, climbed to the roof and scanned the skyline, and soon after the siren shut off, sounding the all clear. No matter what he showed her or told her, no matter how firmly he held her, it was like she was partly in another place and time. Her tears flowed like water, and as a mother I felt completely helpless. Then she said something that sent chills down my spine. Despite the utter silence outside our home, she kept asking, "Do you hear an ambulance? Why is there an ambulance?" My husband knew the story, and neither believed nor disbelieved, but quickly whisked her outside to show her there was no ambulance. She wasn't hurt, and she wasn't going anywhere. In fact, she was going to sit on the couch and play Madden with him. That seemed to snap her back, and after giving her time to get back to herself, I asked her what the fuss about the ambulance was. "I have no idea, Mom," was her only answer.